afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see such a tremendous crowd. My name is Alison Load, and I have the honor of facilitating what I know is going to be a wonderful session. It's a tremendous privilege to have our 6 of our parliamentarians here with us and 3 of us on the panel. What I wanted to do is just take one quick second to tee up the session, to introduce our panelists, and then turn it over to them and to you. This morning, as James said at lunch, we spent a few hours with a number of people from EWB, some development experts, and our parliamentarians to really try to do 3 things. The first was to encourage a dialogue among those 3 groups, which I hope will continue today, on development policy. The second is to discuss the applicability to Canada of some new ideas in international aid that we heard from other countries this morning. And then finally is to reflect on ways that we can enhance opportunities for engagement of parliamentarians and through them of the citizenry as well on international policy, international development policy, and foreign aid policy. So as I mentioned, it's a tremendous pleasure to have 3 of those parliamentarians on our panel today to share some of their observations and reflections. So what will happen now, I'll introduce them in a moment, and then they'll each speak for somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes, and so my job will be to interrupt politely if necessary, just to forewarn everyone. And then we will have lots of time for questions and answers, questions from you that they've all agreed, of course, to answer. There are 3, and I'll start with my left. Peter Goldring, who is the Member of Parliament for Edmonton East. Before entering politics, he was a businessman, and he ran a company which supplied and manufactured electrical systems. So I'm sure he's had lots of opportunity to engage with engineers over the years. Lots, yes. He is currently on the Standing Committee for Foreign Affairs and International Development, where he has served since 2006. Second will be Hedy Fry, who is the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Centre, a medical doctor and the former president of both Vancouver and British Columbia's medical associations. She was elected in 1993. While in government, she served as the Secretary of State for multiculturalism and for the status of women. And then third, we will have Martha Hall Finley, the Member of Parliament for Willowdale in Toronto. First elected in 2008 after, I recently learned, a career as a lawyer, businesswoman, entrepreneur, and quite an accomplished skier, which I guess is how she was able to run up with such dexterity. She currently serves as the critic for the official opposition on international trade. So without further ado, please join me in thanking our parliamentarians for being here, and I'd like to invite Mr. Goldring to my place. Thank you. He's going to speak from there.
Engineers Without Borders for the opportunity to be here today with my colleagues and to just explain a little bit of my background on what I believe is rather related. I've had extensive experience with the nonprofits across the country in dealing with homeless situations and housing, affordable housing situations, so it gives a pretty good understanding of the nonprofits and NGOs that are involved in foreign aid as well too, somewhat of a comparable. And I've written 2 books on that issue. And in the foreign affairs, I have been doing extra work, as many of my colleagues have from time to time. I've been specializing in election monitoring, which has taken me into countries like Guyana, South America, Haiti, and Georgia, as well as Ukraine, Albania, and I just came back from Azerbaijan. So that gives me kind of an introduction to some of the rural areas of those countries too, and you can see the variety of aid that's needed there. How much time do I have? Okay, all right, fine, good. And one of the awarenesses that occurred to me when I was in Haiti in 2006, I did a 20-30 page report when I came back from there, but I wanted to see aid projects while I was there, and I also wanted to see the private sector. A company called Gildan was located there, and where that becomes important is that you can do all the aid projects that you want to do, but if you do not have family sustaining jobs in great numbers, then all of that work can go for naught. And it was very sad to be in Haiti and see the results of 10 years of aid to the country. The country actually slipped some notches in the economic listing of countries. That's after 10 years of aid. And to hear that Aristide, and this was more of a report, that we put something like $600–800 million of aid into Haiti, and Aristide left Haiti with $600–800 million in his pocket. We should have written him a check directly, because it certainly didn't help the country. So these are the type of realizations that there's a great need to look at all aspects of the foreign aid and be critical of where we can make improvements and where we can do benefits. And those jobs that I was mentioning with Guild and manufacturing, 5,000 jobs, just to give you an indication of what that can do. The 5,000 jobs, they're $4 a day, but that's double minimum wage for Haiti, and that is family-sustaining jobs that they desperately need. That can create approximately $50 million per year income into the communities around the factories. So you can see the kind of impact that that has. We can keep putting $100 million a year in aid in the country, whereas if we can try and partner with the private sector to be able to help on this, they desperately need jobs. Their unemployment level is something like about 70–75%. So whatever we're doing on aid, yes. Microfinance, yes. And all of the other reducing disease, helping children, education, all of the other ones. But we also need to do the full circle on it and help the economies so that afterwards they can be able to sustain themselves and grow within the greater world of industrial nations in the future. So that's the importance of that, and as I said, I put a motion into Parliament for another study on Haiti. That'll be coming up in a couple of months' time, and I'm hoping that the Foreign Affairs Committee will be traveling to Haiti and looking at it on the ground to see what we must do, what we can do, and what we can do better. And I'm looking forward next week to travel to Africa and see the best practices that are going on in Africa, to pick up some pointers, and I've been picking up pointers here today, and I hope to pick up some more pointers, things that I can take back to Parliament with me. So thanks very much. It's been a great conference, and a lot of good minds in this room, and I really appreciate having the chance to talk to you.
Engineers and engineers. Carolyn Bennett, who is a colleague of mine who's here today, who is also a physician, we were saying that it would be something that actually physicians without borders should emulate. This ability to bring together civil society, to bring together students, to start working in a collaborative manner to sort of move the focus forward. And so I think you've done a great job in bringing people together and talking about where we want to go and set some clear objectives. Now, what I want to talk a little bit about today is about the role of the parliamentarian, and I'm going to try and be as honest as I can. The role of the parliamentarian in actually moving forward issues such as development, aid, or as you well know, Canada had at one point in time set out the defense, development, diplomacy, and duty to protect as the four things that we felt we needed to focus on in our engagement in any kind of foreign relationships we ever had. And I think that in order to move that forward, one of the key pieces that we need to do is to ask whether parliamentarians have a role. There's a tendency sometimes within government or in the executive branch of government, which is the cabinet, make all the decisions. The question is, should parliamentarians be involved in that decision making? What is the influence of parliamentarians, and how can we use that influence best? Well, the role of the parliamentarian depends very much so on political will and depends on how a democracy has developed and on the soundness of that democracy. And a good democracy not only has the trappings of the institutions of democracy, which is Parliament being one of them, a strong autonomous judiciary, but it also means working with civil society. Because I think civil society is key to helping us lever forward. And it means listening to Parliament, which is one of the key parts of a democracy. Canada's parliamentary democracy. Parliamentarians have a huge role that they can play. First and foremost, parliamentarians work in the communities. I mean, how did I know about Engineers Without Borders? They came to see me in my office in Vancouver, they came to see me in my office in Ottawa, and they told me what their objectives were. They told me how they wanted to see things change. And so I could have, if I had listened to them, had an influence. It all depends on whether that influence works. In our party, and I'm speaking as a Liberal party, we have that ability to make it work because we come to National Caucus every week and we sit down and everyone brings what they heard and pushes that to the fore, and we discuss things in a very open manner. We fight, we argue, we disagree on all things, but we at least get what we heard from civil society pushing up to the fore to influence how we do things if we form government, or even so as an opposition party, how we lead. So that is a role of parliamentarians. Parliamentarians have another role. Within standing committees of parliament, parliamentarians can study issues, bring them together, listen to witnesses who come from civil society and other areas, and formulate public policy. If you're in opposition, all the members of parliament come together. It's not a government-based thing. Parliamentary committees made up of all parties. So when a parliamentary committee sits down and discusses things, they report to Parliament, they come up with recommendations. It depends on political will of the executive branch of a government whether they are listened to or not. And so you could have very many scenarios based on how a parliament could be very parliamentarian, could be influential, or how a parliamentarian could be ignored. The other ways in which parliamentarians can have a very focused role is in terms of working with other parliamentarians. We've heard Peter talk a little bit about, groups of parliamentarians traveling abroad, engaging each other, listening to each other. So there are many parliamentary committees that come together as friendship groups. You have the Canada-African parliamentarians. So you meet with parliamentarians in those countries. You learn more about how things can work more effectively and efficiently. You learn more about the cultural differences in those countries and how those countries function. Because I think at the end of the day, what you're talking about is transparency and accountability. And in order for that to happen, you have to have parliamentarians as engaged as government itself. And to do that, you also need to be able to set clear, measurable objectives of where you want to go, so that when you say you want to do something, at the end of the day, you're able to track back and see that you achieved your objectives. What was what you were doing, how you were doing it work, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of like yogi barriers to say, if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to know when you get there? So you need to know where you're going. You need to set measurable goals and then work together to achieve it. And a good example of how parliamentarians can make a difference is, and I would like to bring this as an example, it's a concrete example, it's the landmines treaty, the Ottawa Treaty on landmines that occurred. This was a grassroots development that came out of civil society who felt that we needed to ban landmines. They came to the government of the day. We were government of the day at the time. I was in cabinet, Mr. Chrétien, Lloyd Axworthy was minister. Civil society came and they spoke to government about why this was necessary. Government of the day listened and encouraged civil society. So together, civil society and government formed a team. And made it happen, took it internationally at the nation-state level. The Canadian government pushed really hard for landmines and took the NGOs along to some of these places where the NGOs pushed hard and pushed hard. At the end of the day, it's really important for parliamentarians, civil society, and government to work together to achieve transparent and measurable goals to make things different. I think Canada is well poised, and Canadian parliamentarians are well poised to really make a difference in the world in terms of developmental aid. And I think it's because we have a very multicultural society. People come from every corner of the globe. They know the culture, the language, the way things work in their countries. So they are able to tell us what would work best if you went to country A or if you went to country B, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. I think development aid should be flexible. I also think we need to look at how we work with NGOs to achieve good, solid development. If you're in a country where there is no democracy whatsoever, as Peter said, you don't want to make sure that you give money to a government and it ends up in a Swiss bank account somewhere. What you want to make sure is that the money goes to the people. And I think to do that, we can use non-governmental organizations to help to develop that aid in certain areas. And one final example, I'm told I have a minute, is, for example, when South Africa, and it was Brian Mulroney government at the time, when the governments of the world, many of them decided to boycott South Africa economically and to bring it to its knees. aid did not cease, because aid was being delivered by the United Church, by other NGOs, to the people. So while government was isolated, the people continued to get aid. So it's really key, if we're going to achieve what we want, parliamentarians, civil society, NGOs, and good solid political will to make it happen, and to make it effective and transparent, and actually make the changes that we're looking for. So it's a joint thing we have to do here, cooperation and collaboration. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And
The member of the NDP.
yes, now to the organizers' credit, they wanted to have this multi-partisan. Peter Goldring's a conservative, Hetty Fry's a liberal. I'm not an NDP, but I'm filling in sort of. I'm a liberal as well, but I am the international trade critic for the Liberal Party, and so I think there was a view that that might have some relevance to what we're doing here. First off, thanks to Engineers Without Borders. I first met George and Parker when they were given an award by the Public Policy Forum quite a few years ago, and so the organization was still in its infancy, and I just am so impressed with everything that you all have done in the whole organization. I've been a big fan ever since meeting those two guys. I have rarely encountered two people. I came away from that night going, holy smokes, I mean, just the enthusiasm, the passion. I also have a bit of a bias towards engineers. My dad was an engineer, one of my sons is an engineer, and I've been pretty active in Ontario, at least, in encouraging engineers to get more involved in politics. I've written articles on it, I've done seminars, because I think that as a group, and as a group of people with a certain training, you bring a tremendous amount to the table. Not just that it's not partisan, but it also, my view very much is that it's a training that relies on facts. It's a training that relies on analysis of those facts to determine what you can create, build, invent, that won't fall down, that will actually do its job. And that is really important when it comes to public policy. And so I just want to say it's a real pleasure to actually be here and to be up here today, because I'm a really big fan. As a member of Parliament, we, and all of us, regardless of party, we have an obligation to Canadians as taxpayers to make sure that taxpayer dollars are spent efficiently and wisely. And so right off the bat, the purpose of ensuring that Canada's international aid and international development efforts are cost effective and actually do what they're supposed to do is hugely important for us in terms of our responsibility to taxpayers. As the international trade critic, I was very keen to come here today more to learn than anything else, because trade and aid have had a rather interesting history over the last number of decades, not all of it terribly good. There have been concerns about too much connection, not enough connection sometimes. We heard a very interesting discussion today about the British system right now. Interestingly enough, development is taking a lead role in the trade discussions, which I found very interesting. I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but I think it's very interesting. But I wanted to find out what people were finding on the ground in terms of how those two relate to each other, and I have to say it's been a wonderful experience so far, and some of those discussions I'm very hopeful will continue. A couple of the things that really hit home to me, and it speaks a little bit to what Hetty was saying about you can't really know how to measure anything unless you know what it is that you're actually trying to measure. And one of the discussions we had earlier started off with transparency and accountability, and ended up in this great discussion of how you do it and how much information should be disclosed and how you actually manage to have politicians as well as civil servants be accountable. And we had to pull the whole conversation back because we still hadn't even touched on, well, what is it that we're actually trying to do? And Ian Smiley earlier today did a little bit of a historical perspective on the Canadian approach to international development and aid, and the whys and what we were trying to accomplish at the time. And top of the list was politics. Second on the list was commerce, and only third was to relieve suffering. And even within that context, because we're a long way as a country from just saying, this is what we want to do. One of our colleagues a couple of years was effective in passing a private member's bill that clarified CEDA's goal to, in fact, address poverty which it hadn't actually been that clear before. But even within that, and I was struck by some of the discussion today, what does that mean? Is the purpose of aid to relieve the symptoms of poverty? Is the purpose to send bags of wheat? Or is the purpose to reduce poverty? Is the purpose to address the causes of poverty? And they're really important distinctions, because the one, you have all sorts of other challenges about distribution and corrupt governments taking what you're actually sending in terms of famine relief, for example. The second one has a whole lot more political involvement in it, in the sense that if a country's economy is completely non-functioning and therefore people are suffering, how is it that Canada can help in that circumstance? That's not just bags of wheat. And so, and I'm still learning. I mean, I think this is a really important discussion. But even with that, Canada still hasn't figured it out. We have a long way to go to really, really be clear what we want to do. We say, you hear all of the right things. We've all said, nice things about what we want to accomplish. But we have to get past the nice sounding things and actually do it. Now, the added layer to that, and it is frustrating as politicians, is that far too often Canadian foreign policy, whether it be Canadian policy on aid, whether it be any other aspect of foreign policy, is very often dictated by domestic politics. That would actually be alleviated if we were clear enough as a country, and not partisan, but as a country, because I can tell you there are people from all parties who feel just as strongly about effective aid, about making sure that our taxpayer dollars go to alleviating suffering. That's not partisan. We might have different views on how to do that, but there are even a lot of people in all parties who have the same views on how to do it. So we need as a country to firmly decide and make it clear that this is where Canada needs to go in terms of foreign development and foreign aid. Absent that, we allow ourselves way too many opportunities to let domestic politics get in the way, and to let domestic agendas get in the way, and even personal agendas. We see this all the time. And I will say, I mean, this has been true government after government, so I'm trying to make this not necessarily partisan, but a problem that exists in any political system. And so I want to conclude with what I think EWB can do to help us. Because we as politicians have to respond to public opinion. In a democracy as we have here, we need to get elected. Well, we would like to get elected. I'd like to get re-elected. I think we'd all like to get re-elected. It's Canadians who vote for us. And so we are, and this is a good thing, we have to respond to public opinion. Engineers Without Borders has a fabulous opportunity. I mean, you already have been doing tremendous work. We've heard a number of examples. Hetty's given examples of where government has responded and in fact taken action, been helped by civil society in doing that. It's a lot easier to accomplish something in government when you know the public is with you. But your organization, because engineers, and we were joking about this earlier, Hetty's a doctor, but I'm a lawyer, right? Like, in terms of reputation, engineers, yes, you guys are great, right? And I say that only partly facetiously. That reputation, but that reputation is huge. It's why Doctors Without Borders has been so effective in so many ways. Take it, run with it, continue to run with it, continue to build, because you are really well placed to help us as politicians make sure that we, whether we're in government, opposition, however we do it, that we can actually move us forward to do the best that Canada can do from an international aid perspective. So just thank you very much. Carry on. We're with you. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much to everyone on the panel. And I didn't have to be strict. That was great. Thank you. I have a feeling in a crowd this large that there are probably lots of questions. So what I'll do is, if you're interested in asking a question, if you put your hand up, I'm going to try to keep a speakers list and simultaneously call on you one at a time. If there's someone specific you'd like to address the question to, please do. And if not, we'll sort of see the panelists answer it as they will. And then one other last request is if you could just introduce yourself, say your name, and just where you're from. So I open the floor to questions. And in front row first. Please. Yeah, thanks.
So, Michael Luth, I'm from the Ottawa Professional Chapter. And my question is, Bill C-293,
unfortunately, there's no microphone in the center. Maybe, I'm not sure if someone from the facility is here.
My question is that
There's no actual
the bill that was passed on 4-8 hasn't made a difference in either the policies that have come out or in the discussions that happened 8 days ago. It's not very obvious that the bill has had any effect at all in where foreign aid in Canada is going.
This was done last 2 years ago. Private members' bills, first and foremost, if they're passed by Parliament and Parliament is working democratically, then obviously that particular bill should be accepted and acted on. In many instances, private members' bills can go somewhere or they can go nowhere. And it, at the end of the day, depends on political will. If it is passed and the government is interested in doing that, the government will. And again, I'm not being partisan. The government of the day will, or the administration will, or will not do it. So quite often, private members' bills, unfortunately, don't get anywhere. And so if the government of the day didn't wish to act on the recommendations of the bill, then it wouldn't happen. If the government of the day wished to act on the recommendations of the bill, then it will occur. So this is what I meant when I talked earlier on about how democracy actually can or does not or is not able to work within Parliament and within civil society. So, you know, it doesn't always work on paper as it's supposed to.
Are you talking about 293, the social responsibility bill?
So that's Bill 4800. Development assistance.
48.
So I thought John McKay's was the social responsibility.
Then we wonder why politics is so confusing. Thank you. And at the back, please.
I wanted to make a couple rhetorical questions, really. So there's no need for an answer unless you want to. My name's Cameron. I'm from Calgary. I'm an engineer, and I wanted to just say to you guys that I think you need to get more involved in Engineers Without Borders. I think you have an understanding of what we do, but not a very good understanding of what we do. And I think the more you find out about what we do and how we do it, the more benefit we can have and the more support we can give you in what you do. Maybe that's too general for all of you. Maybe that applies to some more than others. But
I'm just going to interrupt for a second. I forgot to say my other rule, my Alex Trebek rule, which is that we have to phrase things in the form of a question at some point.
I don't know why. We have a lot to share with them as well, but maybe we'll do that later. Okay, so the question.
Yeah, but no, it's okay. You can keep going, but just make sure there's a question. Just 'cause
yes.
You said there might not be.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I said it was rhetorical. Peter, I'm so glad you went to Azerbaijan. I've been there myself, working with BP, doing the risk analysis for the BTC pipeline. Been really involved in pipeline and the regulatory environment that's currently going on worldwide with pipelines, especially in the wake of incidences last year. Alberta being an energy province, we have an opportunity at some point to get involved with how the politics of energy and transmission and delivery affects the people in those places, such as in Azerbaijan. I'm not sure if there's an answer to the question, but how can Canadian MPs impact the development of international regulation and policy such that power and wealth can transfer in meaningful ways?
Great question.
Well, just a short response. Whether it's Azerbaijan or the other countries that I've been visiting for election monitoring, it's not just monitor the elections, but there is the real serious belief that the better the democracy or the better the democratic institutions of the country are in, the better the aid will be distributed.
But at the same time, with the businesses, we try to meet with the ambassadors or meet with the high commissioners or of the various countries too, because business, it's very important to tie the business in on the trips too. This is something that we had the discussion, and something that CETA doesn't do now. They don't intercorrelate business along with the aid programs, and quite frankly, that substantially affects the population of the country, and how you perform as a good corporate citizen absolutely impacts the country too. And I believe the Canadian extractive industry is probably the best, or certainly one of the best in the world, and they do a great job. Not all countries do, though.
You asked the question, how can MPs get involved? I mean, that was your basic question.
How can they affect?
How can they affect? Well, they can do it in many ways. You heard earlier on, they can pass a private member's bill, they can bring it forward, debate it. They can get involved by becoming members of international parliamentary groups and meet with parliamentarians and leave influence that way. They can also get involved by having, which we don't have at the moment, say, a standing committee or a subcommittee of the Standing Committee of Foreign Affairs can be a committee on development. And therefore, at that level, MPs of all stripes can come forward, can discuss issues, can listen to witnesses such as Engineers Without Borders, explaining to us what are the steps that we can take, and then lever for that. You said we should support Engineers Without Borders, and Martha said she already does, and how we should engage with you more. I think Engineers Without Borders have a huge role to play, because you have a role to play in terms of educating MPs, one. You have a role to play in terms of educating and making public awareness of issues going on to the public as well, and then the role of lobbying, obviously, for the kinds of changes you look for. So all of that you can do with parliamentarians and with the public, because the public can be a very strong partner for you to lever and influence parliamentarians and governments to do the things you wish them to do. So this is how it works. That's the system, and that's the way that you can influence and you can make us more interested. Because most of us as MPs, I mean, I'm a masochist, not an MP, because I left a 97% public trust as a physician to get a 7% public trust as an MP, so I really am quite masochistic in that way. But I mean, the point is that you can lever influence, you can educate us. I don't know a lot of things about a lot of things. I may know a lot of things about health, but I do not know a lot of things about other things. So you need to educate us so we can understand the issues better. So there's a huge role to play in levering political change.
I joked with Hetty earlier that she went from such a high approval rating, at least I didn't have nearly so far to fall. One of the things that I feel very strongly about, and I know that EWB does as well, is that ignorant aid is not effective aid. Your failures report is something that I think is really important, because we have to know, we have to learn, we have to have the knowledge. And so what you do as an organization is very important in that regard. But where we can gain more knowledge is through engagement. Now, we all know that there are lots of governments out there that are corrupt. That causes all sorts of problems with our aid policy, we know that. But we will never be able to effectively provide aid in any country unless and until, as a Canadian government, and that includes all politicians, are engaged in that relationship building. And I express concern about the fact that over the last number of years, Canada has pulled back in its investment in those relationships. I will also say, because you were in Azerbaijan with BP, you said? But in a corporate environment. This is not just a governmental thing. And I look at your list of sponsors for this event, and I think this is fabulous, because we need corporate Canada. I mean, some of the extractive industry, some of the different corporate entities operating internationally have had some challenges, reputational challenges, if we can say that. But I'm a big believer in trade, but I'm also a really big believer in the corporate environment, in also working with. There are so many people I know in business who have tremendous consciences about what we want to see happening internationally and improving the lives of others. You know, this big bad corporation drives me crazy. The fact that you were there, you've learned, you were engaged, is a great example of exactly that opportunity. And if anything, Engineers Without Borders, the more you get to know about what we're doing, and I will say James Hagen, wherever you are, has been doing a fabulous job in getting exactly this, you know, the much greater, there is much greater in the world. Politicians who politicians know about you guys than did a mere couple of years ago. So that's good. But because of what you do, because of what so many of you do in your professional lives, that bridge between the business activities, the business community, the corporate community, and the politicians, and then you add that into those relationships with the recipient countries, indispensable. We're not nearly there yet, but I just say the opportunities because of what you do and by bringing what you do in business and government together is a real opportunity.
Sorry for the long question.
That's great. Sorry for the long answer, so.
I have the unfortunate job of making sure everyone who has a question gets to ask one, so that's why I did.
Yeah, my name is Binoy Prasad and I'm from Ryerson University and I have a social science background. I'm not an engineer. Very short question followed by a short comment. The question is, does any parliamentarian here present know what was the Canadian foreign aid 10 years or 15 years ago and what it is now? If it has declined, and it has declined progressively and very much, why it has declined? Number one. Comment. I'm really befuddled by the observation when MPs in this room say they need to be educated. I think you are enough educated to know that if we can sustain, Canada can sustain our troops in Afghanistan, we can sustain our aid abroad. Thank you very much.
Great having the mic in front of me. First and foremost, you asked about being educated. I must admit I disagree with you. There's one thing to know about an issue. It's another thing to understand the issue and understand what the indicators are that will actually make a difference. I'm a physician. If I want to achieve an outcome, I need to know what are the causative factors, what are the ways in which I can actually achieve that outcome. I don't know all those things. I know something, I know what I'd like to do, I know that what needs to be done, but I think Engineers Without Borders have a huge role to play in saying, here's how you can do it better, here's how you can achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve. I don't know all of those things any more than you know what are the indicators for particular parts of diseases in terms of malaria and TB. Somebody needs to explain to us what are the steps we need to take to deal with eradicating those diseases, and that's where physicians will come in. And people can educate us on a whole lot of things we don't know as well as we should. We know a little bit about a lot of things, but we don't know enough about things sometimes to make the right informed decision. So that's what I'm talking about. But secondly, you talked about what we used to do 10 years ago, and I've been a member of Parliament for 17 years. I came in 1993, was with the Prussian government, worked extremely closely as Secretary of State for Multiculturalism and Status of Women with the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and in terms of looking at aid. One of the things we did do differently was that we focused a huge amount on gender, because we felt that where you helped women, you actually helped communities better than when you helped individuals. So we did a lot of gender work. We also felt that one of the things we wanted to do was to blend all four things. You couldn't just do aid and developmental aid without also looking at developing democratic institutions and helping to have civil society have a huge role to play. That's what democratic institutions do. It gives power to civil societies in the countries that you're trying to help. So you need to look at all of the ways in which you have to assist people not only to get aid, you eventually want people to stop getting aid and become autonomous and become self-sufficient and be able to do the things that we need to do. So you have to look at democratic institutions. You have to look at defense where necessary, duty to protect where necessary, development and diplomacy where necessary, because you're dealing with many different kinds of governments in different parts of the world. Some will take the money and run. Others will, so therefore you need to engage NGOs to help you in those areas. In some cases, you can deal directly with an emerging government that wants to do the right things. There are different ways you have to do it, and how you do it is as important, as Carolyn Bennett always says, as what you do.
I don't have the numbers on to whether, I don't believe that it has gone down, but just for example, a dollar here is $2.3 trillion of aid over the last 5 decades. But one thing that has been done is that and from time to time, it just makes sense. You go through your policies and see what you can do better. And whereas the aid was going to some 111 different countries, we now have a concentration level of 20 different countries that their aid is going to. And one of the other changes in policies, I believe, somewhat, is looking at for example, the former Soviet Union countries. It serves security for the region to try to help them grow their democracies. And if we look at countries like Cuba, it serves Canada's interest and the region's interest to try to work with countries like Cuba, because the United States have that Helms-Burton agreement that prevents them from doing real work in Cuba. So part of the aid is certainly it's to help the people, but it's also to grow the democracies, grow the institutions, and through that, hopefully, to provide better security as well as better for the people themselves.
Thank you. You're next, please.
I'm Chris from UMB. It's kind of hard because I have so many questions I'd like to ask you guys. So I have sort of a two-part question where the two parts are very loosely related, and that's my way of getting around only asking one question.
You should be involved.
Right off the bat, I personally feel that the issue of development and aid needs to be as nonpartisan as possible, because I feel that all the political parties need to be working together to accomplish this. I'd like to know what role you think EWB would play in facilitating such cooperation between all parties, because I think we definitely could serve to play a really good role in that. And then secondly, I would like to know how easily do you think the Government of Canada could adopt a lot of the practices that EWB has? For instance, the failure report, because I'd sure like to see a government do that.
So would I, and I'll relate an example. On my trip to Haiti in 2006, I was given information before I went about the electrification of Jacmel, and how it was touted as being such a wonderful project to have been done, and I believe it was some $40 million too, so not chump change. And when I arrived there and took a look at it, one of the major generators was down in pieces on the floor. They shut the electricity off 3 hours a day, and the design of the system, and I come from a technical background, they had those $200 electricity meters on a house that had a light bulb in it. So, I mean, even the design of the system was way over-designed, way overbuilt, and of course far too technical for them to maintain. And why was it shut down for 3 hours a day? Because they didn't figure in for the people who were paying small amounts for the electricity that the price of fuel oil might go up. So yes, I think there should be some failure reports on aid projects, because that one was just abysmal.
Anyone on the first part of the question?
I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure it wasn't failure report just on aid. Oh, the opportunities. We actually need the public to do informal failure reports on us all the time, and it doesn't happen enough. It's rare to have an organization ask for itself to be criticized. As parliamentarians, that's your job. That's the job of the public, is to criticize us, to hold us to account. I actually just a kudos to EWB. I just learned that a few years ago, the organization had actually asked and paid for an external party to do an analysis of your effectiveness, and I thought, ooh, that doesn't happen very often. So I was actually really impressed by that. What EWB does in terms of bringing together people from different parties, I will say again, in the last couple of years, and James has been hugely involved, but I know a number also just informally, really working hard at doing exactly that. The time spent on Parliament Hill, as frustrating as it may seem sometimes, is really well worth it. The fact that EWB is taking parliamentarians to Ghana next week, I know there's been a huge effort to make sure that that was multi-party. That's really important, and those activities are great. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and trust me, you are not going to solve partisan politics in Canada. But you're already doing good work in that regard, and I can just say, please carry on, because we actually need organizations like yours to do that.
Terrific. I'm going to interject. I don't need to tell people in the room that the math is not working in our favor. We spent 15 minutes on 3 questions, and I've got 7 people on the speakers list, so I'm hoping I can ask everybody to be succinct, please. And next question is over here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Todd from Winnipeg Pro chapter. I'm just wondering, kind of asking for help in that a few years ago when the law was passed about patenting drugs to be sent overseas, it was passed and there was much hoopla, and then it was found out that it was so bureaucratic that no one could actually use it. And the only company that tried said they would never do it again, and it's kind of seen as a failure now. And when Bill C-300 came out, there was talks that at least it was watered down or some people didn't like it. There was at least a debate. But on that bill, I never heard anything negative come out of it until after it was passed. So I'm wondering if there's any way people in your offices, or is there a way that we can get more information about these bills? I'm not a lawyer, I can't understand all this stuff, but does anyone know that these problems could come up before they happen? Because that was clearly written in there to fail. It was a bill that was made to fail. And I was wondering, who are the people in Parliament reading these, and can we have access to your staff who might be doing that, or other things? Who are these people that could help us figure this out?
Who's brave enough to take this one?
Actually, Martha wants to try, but I will say one of the ways to influence MPs and to find out what's going on is to write a letter. Write a letter to the MP, call the MP's offices, meet with them, ask them what the heck's going on, and sometimes bills try to, because I'll tell you something that you don't know about, say maybe C-300. Private members' bills will go nowhere, no matter how good the bill is, if it is going to ask a government to do things that, in the case of 300, would affect the sovereignty of the nation we're going into. We cannot have that happen. That can't happen. You can't go around and tell a nation what to do, an impact on their sovereignty. Also, if it requires to spend large amounts of money, it has to have approval by the government of the day. It has to have what is known as the royal assent for it. And the government can, when you get to third reading, say, we're not going to be able to do this because you're asking us to spend money. We have to decide how we do our budgets, and you can't do that. So bills then get kind of watered down and played with so that they can circumvent some of those barriers so that they can get to the floor and be passed in a final reading. And in some instances, what that does do, it makes the bill become such a hybrid that it's often ineffective. And those are the realities that bills have to look at when they come to the fore. And so those were the 2 problems with that particular bill. And as I said before, one of the things that you need to do, I keep saying it, is to let us know how you feel. But the final thing is, you talked about failure, and I didn't pick up that answer, but I wanted to say, if you don't have clear, measurable outcomes, if you don't know where you're going, if you don't have clear indicators to tell you what are the things that caused the problem in the first place, and measure it and do an analysis, I would say, every 3 years as to whether or not you have affected any kind of change and achieved your objectives, then you know if you're doing the right things in the right way. And you also need to talk to people who know how to do the things in that particular area to help you to make the kinds of right decisions. But that's about accountability. Because it's not just about how much money you spend, it's what at the end of the day you achieve with that. Are you going where you want to go? Are you helping those countries to achieve the things they want to achieve? I mean, that's the big question, and you have to have measurements, and you have to have analysis, and you have to have all of those things if you're going to achieve that. You know that. You guys are engineers. I know that. I'm a physician. You've got to do that if you're going to find out if you're going in the right direction or not.
Okay, next question here, and for everyone else who I've got on the list, if you could get in the middle, if you wouldn't mind standing in the middle, and that might speed it up just a little bit, and we'll bring the mic over there.
Hi, my name's Janet Butler-McPhee. I'm representing the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, one of the many civil society groups that has been supporting strongly Bill C-393. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold. For those who aren't aware, that's the bill that would get life-saving medicine, generic life-saving medicine to developing countries quickly and affordably. But I'm actually not here to ask a question about that particular bill. I'm actually hoping to ask a question that is hopefully just about democracy and very simple. The bill as it stands right now requires a transfer of sponsorship in order to proceed to a democratic vote in the House of Commons. We have assurances from 3 of the 4 major parties that they will allow this bill to go through. And so this question may appear partisan, it really isn't. It's to you, Mr. Goldring. Will your party support the transfer of sponsorship needed for Bill C-393 to go through to its democratic due course?
Well, once again, for any number of variety of reasons, and I can't speak for, obviously, for the party when they make up their mind if they want to have all the members being voted in a whip vote, but we don't have a majority. So if you have all of the other parties lined up, you have the majority. So if you have the confidence of all of the other parties, but this is this, and somebody asked the question on other bills too, and this is one of the difficulties, that even if we find a bill that has problems or difficulties, what we feel as a government would be problematic, we don't have the majority. So sometimes bills will get passed that may have technical details or problems that would make it problematic for the government to be able to action. And that's exactly what Hetty was just talking about on bills. So I can't say, and I can't say what the government would be doing on it.
The bill you're talking about is Judy Washley-Shalice's bill. And because she's no longer a member of Parliament, that bill has to be given to another person to sponsor. The point is that in order for that to happen, there has to be unanimous agreement of the House. The three political parties that are in opposition have given that agreement, but it still cannot be unanimous unless every member of the government party votes for it. If one person votes against it, it's not unanimous. That's a problem, and the government has to commit to whipping their members to voting for it. At least it would be democratically debated.
We have a collective decision to make. We've got 5 people waiting. We have about 4 minutes. Okay, so
really
very quickly, sorry.
That vote has nothing to do with the substance of the vote. It is merely to allow it to go to the House to actually go through the process of debate and discussion. So we are completely, that's to allow the democratic process. So just to clarify, this isn't even a vote on the bill itself. It's just to let it actually be discussed. So we are in favor.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to give everyone an opportunity. Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Sarah Lewis. I live in Nipissing in Northern Ontario. My question is Canada's involvement, or Canada's thinking about international development. From my view, it's an issue that used to be more top of mind to Canadians. International development and aid rarely seems to be top of mind or taken seriously as a political issue, particularly in elections. What are your thoughts on the challenges of making these issues more relevant as a political issue to Canadians? And do you have suggestions to help us accomplish this?
Unfortunately, foreign aid as well as foreign affairs, and I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee, it's not that popular in my riding. So consequently, I get somewhat criticized. Why am I involved in foreign affairs and foreign aid projects? I'm criticized. They say, well, what does that do for me at home on the streets of Edmonton? And, you know, there's many, many people who feel that way, and it's predominantly in more of the rural areas. You might find good acceptance in your major cities, but when you start going across the country to all the rural areas, they all have their priorities. And a government really, if it's from across the country, will reflect it. That doesn't mean that I don't try and I don't put in the reports as a parliamentarian. And the more parliamentarians that you can engage in forums like this and encourage and visit their offices and write them letters, then the more support you'll have for that. You obviously would have my support on it, but you need more of the support from right across the country.
At the risk of sounding like I'm beating up on anybody, Peter is a great guy. He really does believe in development aid and he will audit it as an individual parliamentarian. But I have to tell you, there comes a time when government has to do the right thing by leadership. Government cannot only follow the polls. A government cannot only say people in my riding don't care. They have to do the right thing sometimes and take leadership.
And what we'll do, there are 4 questions left, so we'll take 2 at a time. And then we'll.
I'll speak very quickly. My name is Darren Shemmer. I'm a public servant, and usually we stay anonymous. But I just had to correct an impression that was left by a previous questioner that Canada's aid has been declining. In fact, Canada's aid in 2000 was $2.5 billion a year, and in 2010 is $5 billion a year. And it's a magnificent example of a commitment by all 4 political parties that's been maintained over a decade.
Thank you. Maybe we'll take, that just bought us some time. So we'll go 2 at a time and then we'll have the last question. Thank you.
I think when we look up on the stage, we can see that there's two major political parties in Canada represented. I think that's an exciting image of what we could maybe see happening in development in the future in our parliament. A parliament where partisanship issues are not the big deal. The deal is trying to figure out how we can use Canadian values of internationalism and working towards a better world to improve development processes. So my question, and I can direct it to Dr. Hetty Fry, but it's open to anybody. You mentioned there needs to be a step forward to build a nonpartisan parliament towards development. So I'm going to ask, what are the big barriers stopping this from happening right now? And what are you actively doing to try and create the situation? And what can be done by groups like EWB and everybody else in Parliament to see these necessary steps become a reality sooner rather than later, while there's still time for these things. Thank you.
Great, thank you. One more question and then we'll take them together.
Hi, I'm Brian Smith from the University of Waterloo. My question is, I believe that perception is a big part of how we treat aid in Africa. So I was wondering if each of you could define what you feel the difference between development, aid, and relief are.
In 20 seconds or less.
A little pop quiz. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I didn't quite get your question that was directed to me. If you could possibly, we didn't quite get the gist of it.
I'm just asking, what are you actively doing to try and support the creation of a nonpartisan committee to work towards these international development issues? And what are the big barriers right now you're perceiving that stop these things from happening?
Well, I think parliamentarians have to then push their leaders and, in fact, their House leaders to try and create a new parliamentary subcommittee where all four political parties work together. Now that's sometimes difficult to do because every time you create a new subcommittee, there's a cost to it. There's a cost of travel, there's a cost of all the things that happen with those kinds of committees. But it doesn't mean that we can't all work together to do that. I think you will find in every political party currently that there would be a taste for that people would try to push forward, whether you can get the leaders and the House leaders and the government to agree is going to be the other question. But I think everyone feels that there is a need to do that. Non-partisanship in government comes about at standing committee levels. When parliamentary committees come together and they see an issue and they listen to witnesses, quite often you find that most people begin to hear things they didn't know before, begin to see things from a different perspective, and come together for the greater good to agree. There are many instances in which parliamentarians have come together to agree regardless of political stripe on certain things. But quite often when it breaks down when a particular administration of the day feels that it cannot, either for ideological reasons or for monetary reasons or for other reasons, cannot support that all-party recommendation, and then it starts breaking down again. So the system can work, it sometimes works, it doesn't always work.
I will take a stab at the second one. At the beginning in my opening comments, I said that we're still trying to figure out what exactly we should be doing as a country in terms of real goals. And I think I said at the time, there's a really big difference between relieving the symptoms of poverty and reducing poverty. And the second one, I think, is something that we all would like to do. I don't think it's necessarily a concrete Canadian policy, but I certainly am here to say that's something I would love to see. And then you can get more specific, but I think it's much more important ultimately to address the causes than to just provide Band-Aid solutions. Having said that, we also have a responsibility, an international responsibility in terms of disaster relief. That's much different because that's a one-time thing. That's, an event has happened where you have an opportunity, I would say an obligation, to help in order to get people back to where they were before the disaster struck. That's very different, but I would urge all parliamentarians, I would urge all of you to really push for a Canadian external development policy that really focuses on reducing the causes of poverty as opposed to what I think in the past has been more feel-good aid. It's a longer-term project. It's a lot tougher to do. It involves certain political involvement that I think is tougher to do, but if we really are going to contribute as a country to the world in terms of poverty and what that means in terms of security, Peter mentioned that, it's a longer self-interest, but it's nothing better than doing good for other people that ultimately does good for all of us together.
Thank you. One last question, please. Sorry, not quite yet. I didn't realize there was another comment.
On the development aid and relief, obviously the relief aspect of it, there's the urgencies of food, water, and shelter. Then going from there, you get into your aid. Well, then that's, I think, what the expression was of giving people the fish, and the development would be teaching them to fish. In other words, you cannot just live and have a complete society based on microfinancing and mini farms. You have to have the ultimate, particularly in countries like Ghana, where you've got some 20 million, 24 million people. You need your industry too, the family sustaining industry. And that means that I believe that the aid and assistance should be directed to develop that segment of the society as well too.
Okay, very last question quickly, please.
Okay, so this question is in the interest of creating a critical public, as you mentioned before, and noticing that a trend emerging from the conference has really been a lack of effective communication. I want to ask a question addressing to the EWB ACT campaign, which asks for accountability and transparency are the two that I'm really focusing on here. But what do you think would be a good strategy for us as EWBers and also MPs in government to really ensure that the public is able to access the necessary information? So just really quick little context thing. At the Queen's chapter, we recently tried to do a comparison of the published information by CETA versus what our Overseas African Program staff have noticed in their observations of CETA work. And we found that it was very, very difficult to actually get information from CETA. So what strategy should we go about demanding availability to this?
Thank you.
Information from CETA is something that the CETA representative would have to answer to. But I do think that part of being government and spending taxpayers' money and doing things that you say you're supposed to do is to be accountable, and that's part of accountability. It should be that government is open enough to give people the information they need and the results of analysis. So that's all I will say, and CETA can tell you whether they're doing that or not. I think that EWB has a huge role to play in terms of public awareness and public education, because the public is sometimes asleep at the switch. I think sometimes the public doesn't understand the difference between the question that was asked as development aid and relief. Relief, as everyone says, is an emergency thing. Something catastrophic is happening, you've got to help people out. I see development as a broader thing. There's economic development, there's social development, there are all kinds of democratic development. Development is a big picture thing. Aid is one way to assist development. It's not the only way. So that aid is a part of developmental decision making, but development is a broad objective that you want to achieve. I think that you have to really look at using the website, doing town hall meetings, engaging in universities, helping to get young people to understand, students especially, to get the public to understand what is going on, why it's necessary for us to care about what happens in other countries. It's absolutely necessary for us to do that. And why is it if it doesn't affect me at home in my own backyard, I should give a fig? I think those are the kinds of things that you can do very, very well. And I will tell you that as an MP, when you do that, it helps me as well to be able to go back for those things, because you're helping people to understand why I go to bat for it. Doesn't mean I won't. I go to bat for it anyway. But it does help to make everybody go in the same direction. And that is an important piece that you can do.
And on that note,